Ooh. Thank you. I used to carry a jug of Captain Morgan's around like this, but that's not what this is. It's water, I promise. I'm Patricia W, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Patricia.
It's an honor to be here. My sobriety date is April 1st, 2014. My home group is the Cleveland 12-step group in Clayton, North Carolina at Oakland Presbyterian Church. We meet on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Got to check with her. She knows everything. We do step study, tradition, open discussion, speaker meeting, and then the fifth Wednesday is dealer's choice. So I have a sponsor, and I sponsor other folks. And yeah, so I got all that out of the way. I think I remembered everything. I'm pretty nervous. I'm still suffering from extreme self-centered fear. That's something I've dealt with my whole life. I don't allow it to make me drink anymore, but I still suffer from it. And this thing is cool. So just give me a second. I'm supposed to tell you in a general way what it was like, what happened, and what it was like now. I don't remember my first drink, but there is a picture of me. I don't know if Steve's seen it or not, but there's a picture of me at about 8 months old in a bonnet, on a blanket, like real pretty mountain surroundings. I'm from the mountains of western North Carolina, and I've got a Busch Light can. So I started pretty young. I remember being a toddler and my grandpa having a cold beer in his recliner, and I'd run up and grab a swallow of it, and I'd go, ah, and he'd just laugh, and I'd just think that was the best thing in the world. So me and alcohol have been friends for a really, really long time. Like I said, I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in a really poor part of the state, and my mom was, uneducated. She had 3 of us back to back. None of the daddies stayed around. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. Growing up in that kind of environment, the stress and pressure that my mama had to take care of the 3 of us with no real education and no help, there was it was pretty chaotic at times, and her anger at her situation in her life sometimes bled into the way that she treated us kids. Her anger was explosive but not consistent, so it just made for I never knew what was going to happen, and I always tried to figure out what was going to happen and make sure that she was happy, or so I could be protected. And that's a trait I carried on into my adulthood, and probably an early symptom of my alcoholism, even as a young kid, trying to be the actor, trying to control my surroundings so things worked out to the way that I wanted them to work out. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house, and my papa was an alcoholic. He drank. He started at noon on the dot. It was 11:59. He had a cuckoo clock, and he'd go to the fridge at 11:57 and grab his cold beer, put it in his koozie. If he was going to make one of them tomato juice drinks or whatever with that, he'd have that homemade tomato juice sitting right there in his mason jar, and he'd sit and just wait for that clock to chime at 12. I think in his mind that made him not an alcoholic, but I'm not sure. But he drank from 12 o'clock until he passed out in his recliner. And he was my best friend. I loved being up there. When I was at his house, I got to do what I wanted when I wanted to do it. I got to eat when I wanted. He didn't bother me at all as long as I ate dinner with him in the day. But now he's one of those Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde drinkers. And at night, he was a completely different person. And him and my grandma split up when I was 6 or 7. I don't want to tell you an age because I'm not sure. And I don't want to lie at the podium. I've been told that's the worst thing in the world to do. Paige Wood said it. But I remember right before the divorce, they had separate bedrooms. And I remember the night she made me start sleeping in his bed. And she left probably not long after that. And at that point in my life, I didn't think that there was anything wrong with that situation. I loved him and he loved me and he was my best friend during the day. I didn't learn what was actually happening until much later, when I was old enough to process what was going on, when I would be moved from my bed to his bed. I only share that because I used that time in my life for many, many years to drink and do drugs and just destroy anybody that came into my pathway. And it wasn't my fault. You know, if you had had the upbringing that I had, then you would have done it too. I actually had a professional tell me that at a detox facility, and I ran with that hard. I was like, you daggone right. And I got missing, and I stayed out there for even longer. But he and I would drink together, and I think that I have a lot of speculation, and the memories aren't real clear, but I think that those nighttime drinks, he said that it was to build my blood. He made homemade wine and homemade liquor, and it made me strong. But I think it was to make me relaxed, and so I don't really care. So whether I understood what was happening or not, my brain learned pretty early on to associate drinking with like everything being okay, you know. I was probably about 8 or 9 when I started sneaking beers during the day, like I couldn't wait for that nighttime drink. So Papa had this, he's one of those bargain shoppers, so he would go to like the Rite Aid or the Walgreens and he wasn't particular about what beer he drank, just whatever beer was on sale. So he'd take the coupons in there and fill his shopping cart up with cases and cases of beer, and it was just stocked. The refrigerator, the top shelf was just stocked. Non-stop. So he recycled, though. That was one thing. Like, we had a trash can and a recycling can. And he would go to the bathroom or something like that, and I would sneak to the fridge and psh. I loved that sound. Psh. I'd crack that open and I'd chug it just as fast as I could, and then crinkle it and lightly set it in the top of the recycling so I didn't make a bunch of noise with the clanging. So he died when I was a freshman in high school. And I kind of lost my stuff for a little while. It was a difficult time for me. Like I said, he was my best friend. We drank beer together. He taught me how to grow tomatoes. Taught me how to ride a riding lawnmower. We watched Clint Eastwood movies. He was my best friend, but then there was that other part of him that I had chosen not to think about. When for a long time, if anyone said anything ill about him, I'd fight him. But so when he died, my brain tried to reconcile those two parts, and there was a relief that I couldn't explain either. And I just really went off the deep end and just started drinking. And I'm just a bad alcoholic. It doesn't have anything to do with where I came from or what happened to me. That's just who I am. I love it. I love the way it makes me feel. And I can honestly say that for those couple of years, drinking probably saved my life, because being sober was miserable for me. I hated my existence. I hated yours. Just because I knew that you hated me, I probably wouldn't even talk to you, but I knew that you hated me, and I hated you because of that fact. I would drink to blackout instantly. I was one of those girls that had to prove that she was just as tough as the guys, and I really I liked doing guy stuff. I liked being outside. I liked setting stuff on fire and squalling tires in the car and fishing and stuff. I didn't like shoes or nail polish or none of that stuff. So I hung out with a lot of guys, and they would think it was funny to get the little girl to do keg stands, and that's what I'd do. I'd do keg stands and then go barf behind somebody's Ford pickup and then wipe my mouth and come back out and hit another keg stand. And that's just how everything was. I left home. Me and my mama got into one final knockdown, drag out. And I put my hands on her, and I had never done that before. And then I left home. And I moved in with a friend who had some irresponsible parents. So we were living in this trailer while they was living down at the beach, and it was like this party house, and we do a bunch of stuff there, drinking mainly, but we added some other stuff. And then, I moved on from the drinking. I realized that the blackouts and, you know, different fellas, it was pretty sad stuff for a 16-year-old to be, you know, waking up in my own vomit, and it was pretty gross for a while. It was gross. But I met a much older man. He was one of my friends' dads, and he had some party bags, is what I call them for the sake of this meeting. And what I discovered in those party bags was that, like, I didn't get blackout drunk. I didn't black out. I didn't hardly get drunk at all. I was just roaring, going, you know, and it was good. And my tolerance is already pretty high, but then I could really drink those boys under the table. Like, I could really prove the point that I was just as tough and just as good as they were. And that's how I spent, like, the next 7 years of my life, with a drink in one hand and one of them party bags in the other hand. And I didn't care. I got my first felony at 17. One of them party bags, they found one. And you know, me and that man, it was a very unhealthy relationship. That's another thing I'm good at. I'm good at drinking and party bags and fighting and all that stuff, but I'm really good at picking the worst absolute person that I should be in a relationship with and riding that thing until the wheels fall off. And that's what I did with him. And that's just me in general. If it's a bad situation, I just ignore it. And, like, it doesn't matter. I don't get stopped until something stops me. Judge, you know, or whatever. So we were together, and you know, he was an entrepreneur of those party bags. So he had a lot of attention from different folks. Different gals would come up there, and I'd try to run them off. I had a chop saw after one time. And it was a mess. A lot of people really don't, when they see me or talk to me, they don't believe that I'm the kind of person that would chase a gal off with a chop saw, but I am, or I was, you know, and I'm not anymore. And that's this program. I think the biggest fight he and I ever got into, because it turned violent pretty quick, the biggest fight that him and I ever got into was me in a Dodge 1-ton and him in a Massey Ferguson tractor. And we were just backing up and, like, running and crashing into each other. And he dropped the blade on the hood of the truck, and, like, I slid off the side of this. It wasn't a mountain, but I'll say a mountain for the sake of the dramatic, but it's probably a steep hill. But and I jumped out of the truck and, like, tucked and rolled and tried to get away and all that, and he left, and I just waited for him to come home. Like, there was not any indication in my mind, hey, this is probably not good, you need to get away from this situation. And I share that to share about the insanity, right? Because that's what the book talks about, that we're crazy people. I'm insane. And I use alcohol, I use other things to be less sane, right? But what happened for me is that it stopped working. It stopped working. And when it stopped working, the insanity that was there before, coupled with the insanity of all the substances I had been using, really just turned into this big, dark cacophony of just chaos. So me and that man had a couple of children that were removed from my care because of the lifestyle that I was living. And that didn't stop me from drinking or doing any of the things that I was doing. Sorry, that was... But, so nothing stopped me. The heavy machinery chicken fight, the losing custody of my children, the beatings that I sustained, you know, the gunfights that we got into. We were just some real raw hillbilly redneck folks acting crazy. on a whole bunch of acres where the cops didn't know what was going on or anything like that. We used to play with sticks of dynamite. You know, it was a rough situation, and none of it, I thought it was awesome. For someone like me that had felt powerless their whole life, when I would put those things into my body and I would live that life and chase people with chop saws and fight a grown man, like, I felt powerful. And the first time I went to jail, I went for like a couple of weeks, and I bawled like a baby the whole time. But then I made it out of that, and then going to jail became like this rite of passage, like street cred, like, you know, going back at the joint or whatever. And mind you, I'm like 17, 18, 19 years old, and I'm in and out of jail, in and out of jail, in and out of jail. And I finally had a lawyer. Basically, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was like, you know, we know you're a good gal, but this stuff, like, you've got to get some control over your life. And so they sent me to prison. I came down to Rocky Mount to prison in 2011, and they gave me this test when I got there, because it was actually, at that point, I had realized that the party bags were my problem, and I just needed to stick straight with alcohol. And at the time that I went to prison in 2011, I'd racked up a couple of DWIs, a few months within each other. So they gave me this test. They call it the SASSY test. I don't know what it stands for, and I don't know if they give it anymore, but I know that it gauges whether or not you've got a problem with alcohol. And I don't know if I passed it or failed it, but they sent me to a treatment facility where it was called the Mary Frances Center, and they tore that down. But I went there, and that was the first time I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. That was the first time that I was introduced to any type of recovery. I didn't realize that I had any choices in my life. I just kind of did what was right in front of me, regardless of, and I'm not necessarily talking about drinking or drugs or anything like that, just whatever was presented, I just did it. I didn't know that I could pause and think about something. I didn't know that I could weigh my options. I was just very impulsive, and just, that's how I lived my life. And so when I got there, I learned about choices, right? And I was able to address that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing in a way that I had never done before. I was able to get honest with myself and with one of the counselors there about the nature of that relationship and the payoff for me, you know. Once I realized that it was wrong, I continued to do it, because being at his house and doing whatever I wanted to whenever I wanted to, that was more valuable to me than what he was asking of me later on that night, because my mom's house was so chaotic, you know. And so I started walking through this stuff, and then I started going to AA meetings. And I remember I had a moment of surrender. And I'm never someone that surrenders peacefully, you know, and like, this is one of the best. No, I'm not that person. I'm very angry, because when I surrender, it's just like in war. It's because I've been forced to my knees against my will. And I remember just throwing my hands up and telling Creator, like, you win. Those are my exact words. You win. I suck at living my life, and I don't want responsibility over it anymore. And that's when I met the woman that would be my first sponsor. And this center was in Tarboro that they sent me to from the prison in Rocky Mount. And she lived in Rocky Mount. And she came in every week to bring a meeting. And I told her I wanted to go through the steps. And she couldn't take me through the steps like the way that she would want to, because of the guidelines and her work schedule and all of that stuff. So she took me through the steps through the mail. And like, she would write me letters, and I would write her back. And when she would come and take that meeting, we would take a second to do the third step prayer. And it got me through. And then when it came time for me to be released, I was in the middle of writing my 4-step, and I didn't want to go home. I knew that I wasn't well yet, and I was terrified to go home. And she helped me get into a halfway house in Rocky Mount. And I went to a retreat probably 2 weeks after I got out, I went to a little place called Medoc Mountain, and I did my fifth step there, and it was magical. I felt so, saying all those things out loud, and having someone not really care, give me a hug and say, hey, it ain't so bad. This is what I did. And I prayed those prayers, and I left that place with a family and just a whole new perspective on life. I had a spiritual awakening. And I went back and I got super immersed in AA. I got involved with the church that ran that halfway house. I got a job. I was fully self-supporting. I was doing it. And then I met this boy. He was a Marine. And, he was a newcomer. And I had it. So at this point, that spiritual awakening, all the step work and establishing conscious contact with God, all of that was very real in my life. But I did this thing where I quit running ideas by you all, and it was just a direct message from God, and I didn't need any of you to know about it because then it would ruin God's plan. So I lived in that world. My sponsor today knew me back then, and I made an amends to him when I came back in to sobriety. And he told me, he was like, well, Punky, you sort of thought you was sitting on the right hand back then. And I did. I thought that I had a line to God that you guys didn't know about. It was just mine. I needed to protect it at all costs and not tell you guys. So I started to do that way of thinking where God's will was what I wanted, and I was just lining it up like that. And so I had it in my head that this Marine and I were destined to be together. And he was going to help me get my kids back, and we were going to have this picture perfect life, and everything was going to be wonderful. So we started sneaking around and seeing each other. And then when he relapsed, he called me and not his sponsor. And I went over there and I was like, it's okay, we can work through this and blah, 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 blah. And then I left, but then there was this thought, what if I drink with him? And so I thought this whole thing out. This is that insanity, right? That insanity that I was telling you about. I was starting to return to sanity because I was relying on my self-will and not God's will anymore. And the return of that insanity began with this single thought. If I drink with him, we relapse together, then we get sober again together. And then it's this huge, powerful, we're going to be a power couple in AA. It's going to be awesome. And so, I mulled that around in my head for a little while. I had it all planned out. And I decided one day, probably not too long from that I was going to walk to the corner store. I was all alone in my Oxford house. I had not called any of you to run any of this by you, even though that drinking, that's the cardinal sin, right? We've got to really stay away from that. But I never once questioned God's will for my life because I was a disciple and I was full of faith. And so I decided, I'm just going to go over to the corner store and I'm going to grab me a tall boy. It is what it is. And on the way to the store, I remember praying a prayer. God, if you do not want me to drink, if this is not your will, stop me right now. And he did. So I got drunk and hid it from all of y'all. But that's the thing, though, right? I was demanding that God shoot a lightning bolt or send a stray cat by to tell me that it was a bad idea. What God had done, though, was put all of you, all of those people in AA that loved me and cared for me, he put those people in my life to be that extra connection when I'm having those insane thoughts. I didn't call any of you. He had given me the way out of that situation. I chose to ignore it because I wanted a ball of fire or a burning bush. So I started drinking, and I kept it hid pretty good, I think, for a while. And that boy had an ex-wife, and she wasn't even his ex-wife right then, to get honest. They were still married. They were separated. And That right then should have been the clue, right? God's not going to pair me with an unavailable man, but you couldn't tell me nothing back then. Probably can't tell me nothing now, but he spent Thanksgiving with them. How dare he? You know, and I went crazy wild drinking. I think I drank like 6 bootleggers in like 10 minutes. I drank 3 of them in the bathroom in the convenience store that I bought them in. And them's nasty. I see your face. They're gross. I know. But they get the job done for $1.79, and I was all right with that. So I spent the evening with one of the teenagers from the church that I was youth leading at. And she was doing her little experiment with alcohol at the same time that I was sliding into just real dark despair. And she had to go to work the next morning. And I woke up and she was scared because we had partied in her car. She wanted her dad to like smell the cigarette smoke and all that stuff. So she had to go to work. I don't have a license, right? Because I have one now, thanks to the program. But back then I did not have a license. And my bright idea was, well, I'll drop you off at work and I'll go get the car cleaned out. And then I'll come pick you back up and we can go see your dad and they'll never know anything. So while she was getting ready for work, I was living at my sponsor's house at this time. I dug through the couch at my sponsor's house and found enough change for a bottle of Wild Irish Rose. So what I did was I dropped her off and then I went and bought me a bottle of Wild Irish Rose. And I'm just ripping the highways, running up and down. I'm crying. I hate my life. I hate that man. I miss my kids. I'm really mad at God. I think I'm listening to something. I think it was Mumford & Sons, I believe. Just crying and singing with my bottle of Wild Irish Rose. And I think I got the car up to over 100 running back. And there was like this 2 or 3 mile stretch where there were exits that had bridges. And I was just looping it. It wasn't long before I got pulled over. Running that like a racetrack, and the cop asked me if I had been drinking, and I just broke down. I was like, yes, and I was crying, and there was a bottle. I think I asked her if I could finish it before she took me to jail. She declined. I went to jail, and then my secret was out. You know, everyone knew. Because I was away from home. There was no one I could call that was not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous to come and pick me up. And I got told to sit down and shut up and don't say nothing because I didn't know anything about being sober. In that first year, I'd spoke at conventions and I had done a lot of service work in AA, and, you know, people had a lot of faith in me. I had a strong message of what God can bring us through, and I broke a lot of hearts. And I stopped drinking, I think, long enough to get AA members to write letters to the judge so I wouldn't go to jail. But I never got over the obsession to drink. And as soon as that court case was over, I started drinking again. And I had some other meltdown, and everybody found I was emotional. I think I broke into somebody's house, and a member of AA's brother, because I knew he had some medications in there. And, you know, I went to jail. Their solution was, you want to make this right, go to jail. So I turned myself in, and then I bonded myself out, and then I went back to the mountains. And at the mountains is where I know how to get all those party bags too. I didn't know how to get that stuff down here. So I think from December, I guess it was a little bit before that, but it was only 2 months of just really sad, pathetic existence. I had money saved up because I'd been a responsible citizen for a little while, but I burned through that pretty quick because all of my friends, you know. But for a while, that insane thinking told me, this is what you need. So I would preach AA in the trap house and like in the bar. Like I would tell these people about the power that I had found in recovery. And I would tell myself that this is why God allowed me to relapse, is I needed to like bring the message to these folks. And they listened. They would hang on my every word, and then I ran out of money and they stopped coming around. So I don't know if they were there for the party bags and booze or if they were there for the message. I think I know which one. But I ended up back in prison again. And at this point, I was a shell of myself. And I could not be accountable. I heard Dave Cook say, and I hope I get it right, because I don't want to quote him wrong, but that the alcoholic suffers from the inability to see themselves as they truly are in their worst moments. And that was me. I was sitting in that jail, and it was everybody else's fault that I was there. It was my grandfather's fault. It was my mom's fault. It was those people in Rocky Mount's fault for making me go back to jail to begin with. And it was just, and I couldn't be accountable. And because I couldn't get accountable, I decided that I needed to die. So I was just going to wait my time out. And when I got out, I was going to end my life. Well, they wouldn't let me out because I didn't have an address to go to. I burned every bridge that I had, and I don't know if I'd burn every bridge that I had, but my pride and ego would not let me make any phone calls to anybody. So I just told them I didn't have nowhere to go. And they sent me to a homeless shelter in Wake County that also has a treatment facility built in. Audra checked me in there. Ain't that cool? Now she's my best friend and my neighbor. We live two doors down from each other. But she checked me in there, and the first night I was there, one of the people that family I talked about from Medoc Mountain, one of those people were there. She was there, and she saw me coming out of that shelter. And when I saw her, I just started crying. And she just hugged me, and the judgment, just whatever I thought I would get from members of AA wasn't there at all. And I just told her, I said, "Can you take me through the steps?" And she said, "Yeah." And we got to work. I worked hard. And when we got to that fifth step again, nobody let me play the victim card. And thank God for that. Thank God for that, because that card had done nothing for me but give me all the ammo I needed to destroy you, destroy myself, time and time again. And she really forced me to accept my part, even in the things that you wouldn't think. Like, I never told on my papaw. I never let anyone know what was going on. I never gave someone the opportunity to get me out of that mess as a child. I was fearful my whole life, and I wanted what I wanted. And when I faced those things, I did not have that. That fifth step did not bring like joy and relief. I was angry for weeks after that. And then I got over it. And I worked the rest of the steps. I made amends. I think some of the hardest amends I had to make were to AA members. Because there was most everyone else in my life had done me harm as well. But the AA members that I hurt and lied to and used, they had done nothing but loved another person in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had to face that at this point my behavior was hurting innocent people, and I needed to do something about it. And I met a boy. He was at the men's facility, because there's a men's campus and a women's campus, and y'all, we're not supposed to interact, but we did. And we left that program early, but we got married. He's a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He sponsors folks. We've got 2 kids together. We bought a house 4 years ago. We're both employed. The power doesn't get cut off at my house. We got insurance on our vehicles, and the tags are up to date. This may sound like small things, but for an alcoholic like me, these are huge. We have a family dinner every night, best we can. We've got tons of presents under our tree. We got people that love us and that we can call and will come and help us when we need help, and know that we'll do the same for them. We have a life, like a real life. And that's because of this program. My husband and I are sick folks, and alcohol is but a symptom, and that is true for me. But it seems to me that sometimes our defects bring out the worst in each other. But the one thing that we have been able to do is stay committed to our own spiritual growth separately and then together as a couple. And we decided that we loved each other, and no matter what, we were going to work it out. And that's what's happened, and we have a really great life. I work with the newcomer when I get asked, and I love the steps. They saved me. They released me from the prison of the obsession. But where I have truly learned how to live and be a person is through the traditions, through working with other alcoholics. The first tradition is, teaches me that wherever I go, I'm a small part of something bigger, be it a job, be it at my family, be it at somebody's birthday party, and that helps me stay grounded and helps me see that I need to do my part to keep everything flowing smoothly. The 7th tradition changed my life because the fully self-supporting, for a while it was just about me buying my own cigarettes, and now at this point in my sobriety I realize that means everything. That my emotions are my responsibility, that my physical health is my responsibility, the way I think and see the world is my responsibility. And for a really long time, I looked to everyone else around me to make me feel okay. But that tradition has taught me that I have the power to make myself okay. And when I do that, it helps the people around me be okay. It never fails that when I'm struggling with something, one of my girls starts struggling too with the same stuff. And I'll tell her, you can't act crazy like that. That man loves you. And then God flashes this image of where I cussed my husband out the other day, and I realized that I need to work on some things too. And that's been so great for me and humbling. It's easy for me to rest on my laurels because this program and God has given me such a great life. But when I work with the newcomer, I'm not only reminded of where I've been, but the isms that I still have that are still kind of trying to work their way back in. I can't say enough about what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for my life. I could try, but there's no words to describe it. I'm a completely different person than who I was 8 years ago. And my life is completely different than I ever thought it would be, ever could have imagined for myself. And for that, I'm grateful. I'm truly honored to have been asked to speak here, and I appreciate y'all listening to me. That's all I got.